Hi, thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to talk about how I created the piece The Artist, which is part of a series of 12 pieces I'm working on as part of my archetype series. And all of this was really, even though I've wanted to do this series for 8 or 9 years and couldn't really get my head around what it should look like, when I started playing around with backgrounds and textures, thinking about a new class that I want to develop online, which is now going to enroll for June, I realized that the things that I was playing with and the techniques I was discovering were really igniting my excitement and could be the foundation for this series that I had wanted to do. So I'm telling you that partly because it's the backstory and partly because I know how many of us have an idea that we'd like to pursue, but we don't quite know how to do it. And playing around with something as simple as literally play is research, playing around with backgrounds or textures or techniques that are unfamiliar to you might be exactly what you need to do to shake something loose, the way this shook this series out of me. I have a very strong artist archetype, and here is my rendition of that, 2022. These pieces, just for a little bit of backstory, are 10 inches wide, most of them. I'm trying to keep them consistent so they'll hang together well as a series. And they range between 19 and 22 inches tall. So they're relatively compact, small pieces, but you can get a lot of printing and information onto them if you do some of your research in advance, which is how I always begin my process. So each of the elements that you see here has some significance for me, and that makes the process of putting them all together that much richer. Right now, I've been repurposing a lot of old sheets that I've had as drop cloths on my table. I love to reuse and recycle everything so that I can keep it sort of a continuous closed loop with as little paper and waste as possible. And when I was starting to play around with the techniques that I am referencing here, I was using a brayer a lot of the time. And when I used the brayer, I was cleaning the brayer literally on the drop cloth that was on top of the table. And what I found was that this was developing really beautiful layers where colors were overlapping, and I was sometimes getting fragments of images. And so that's one of the sort of serendipitous things that was happening that I maximized as I went along. So let's look at some details. You can see here where the layers of paint have really built up, and that little white printed image is translucent white textile paint from Prochem, so you can really see the layers that are underneath. I'm using stencils directly on the fabric, and then I'm also using stencils on a jelly plate. And they're, boy, oh boy, you really can't imagine how many cool ways there are to use stencils until you start exploring and playing and challenging yourself with that age-old question, what if? Up above, you can see some textures that I created with a whole series of rubbing plates that I'm making from found objects. And then you can also see the brush strokes directly on the cloth behind some of the patterning. Here's another close-up of that area, because in this particular instance, it's a fantastic opportunity to bring paper and fabric together on one surface. I'm crazy about collage. I've used it for years in my work. The top segment you see there in the bluish gray is actually deli paper. And then, of course, the printing that you see down below is on the drop cloth. One thing I love about organza, whether it be silk or whether it be cotton organdy, could function a little bit the same way, is that when I fuse it onto the surface, I can knock back certain areas of the color, and I can also trap and embed things in between. And then I can come back and print with that stencil on top again in order to give some continuity to the surface. One of the most important things about working so small is that all the elements really do need to hang together and make sense. So I can audition, and sometimes the auditioning takes longer. You know, it's an interesting back and forth. First you play, and experiment, and you like what happens. And then you start thinking how to be more intentional about it and how to introduce particular elements into the surface or onto the surface again, so that you will have a certain sort of visual coherency. And I do have a YouTube video that explains how to do inkjet transfers and then add them to other compositions. And that's what this butterfly is. Inkjet printed on silk organza, Misty Fuse or fusible web on the back, or you can use matte medium. Got to be really careful with inkjet and matte medium or it will bleed. But in that free YouTube video, I point out the specifics of how to accomplish that. I love my butterfly. Artwork evolves perhaps in a very similar way to how a butterfly evolves from a caterpillar and goes through stages in order to manifest its true beauty, which is what happens for us as artists when we're lucky. Another really exciting technique I've been playing with is drawing on the jelly plate and then printing it onto various backgrounds, including, in this case, a lightweight 12 mummy silk habitai. I could have hand colored this little crocus image, but within the context of this series, I'm adding these floral images, but I'm keeping them black and white because I like the contrast against the interest of the sort of abstracted and sort of smeary printed shapes. And you can see that when I use this lightweight silk habitai, which would also be true of organza, some of the color from behind it shows through. And then I can also, as I've done over here on the right-hand side, I can overprint it to get rid of some of the blockiness or to integrate it into the surface. So there it is, finished, final. A lot in the series have had stitches added to them. I didn't stitch onto this one. I suppose I still might. We'll have to think about it. I have 11 finished in the series, and I'm going to record a piece like this on each one and share it here free on YouTube. And I hope you are enjoying them and getting some ideas of your own. Please do follow me on Instagram and like the videos that I share on YouTube. Consider subscribing to my channel so you always find out first in line when I've added something new. Glad to share all this stuff with you, and I love it when you're in my classes. So let's stay in touch.